sorry.
Okay, no worries.
Not me, Josh.
All right, we'll make a start. Thank you so much for everyone for joining us today. Welcome to Wolverhampton Art Gallery. Can I just check first of all, can everyone hear me? Yes, wonderful. We will try and make sure we remember to project our voices. We are obviously not mic'd up this morning. Just a quick mention about fire alarms. We're not expecting a fire alarm today, so if you do hear the fire alarm go off, if you could please make your way out of these doors and follow the guidance of staff out of the building. Okay? I think that's all our housekeeping for today. So let me really warmly welcome you to this In Conversation with our two guest artists today, Charmaine Watkiss and Emii Alrai. My name is Sophie Hatchwell. I'm Associate Professor of Art History at the University of Birmingham, and I am very, very happy to be here today. I'm sort of chair or compere of this In Conversation. So this In Conversation is related to the exhibition that's over in the temporary galleries, which is the British Museum touring exhibition, Drawing Attention, Emerging Artists in Dialogue. And our two guests today are two of the artists represented in that exhibition. I hope you've already had an opportunity to go and see their work. So what we're going to do this afternoon is I'm giving a brief introduction to both of the artists, and then they're going to introduce you to their work. After that, we're going to have an open conversation about their practice, drawing, some of the themes from the exhibition, and there'll be opportunities as well for you guys to ask questions to the artists too. Okay. So first of all, let me introduce our two artists in conversation today. So Emii Alrai is an artist who uses various materials in their practice to investigate memory, critique Western museological structures, and explore the complexity of ruins. She has created many sculptural and installation works, and her works operate as large-scale realms built in relation to bodies of research concerning archaeology and natural environments, the environments from which these objects are excavated from. Her works weave oral histories, nostalgia, and details of language to question the rigidity of empire and hierarchical powers in relation to the static presence of history. We're going to be exploring today how her drawing relates to other forms of her practice, which include works such as clay vessels, gypsum forms, steel armatures, and the creation of labyrinth-like spaces. She has had residencies at Launchpad in France, at the Villa Medici. Her work has been exhibited at the Hepworth Wakefield, the Jerwood in London, various other locations, Leeds, internationally in Paris, Cincinnati, Amsterdam, just to name a few. So thank you very much, Emii, for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
I also would like to introduce Charmaine Watkiss. Charmaine's work is concerned with memory stories. She creates narratives in relation to research into the African Caribbean diaspora. And this is then mapped into her creations of female figures. She draws herself as a conduit to relay stories which speak about collective experience. Her practice addresses themes including ritual, tradition, ancestry, mythology, cosmology. From her recent solo show, The Seed Keepers, Charmaine has been investigating the herbal healing traditions of Caribbean women, especially those of her mother's generation, and connects these traditions through colonisation back to their roots in Africa. She has also undertaken residencies also at Launchpad in France, which we found out yesterday. She was a commissioned artist for the 12th edition of the Liverpool Biennial in 2023. Her work has been exhibited at the Haus der Kultur und der Welt in Berlin, the National Museum at Duke University, Leeds Art Gallery also, and the Carl Friedman Gallery. And her work is held in private collections, including the British Museum, the Government Art Collection, Cartwright Hall, the Abbott Hall Museum, and the National Museum. Welcome, Charmaine. Welcome, Emii.
Thank you.
So would you like to start off by saying a little bit about your work? And we've got some images to share with the audience here as well. I believe... Oh, sorry, one second.
Oh, we've got mates.
There we go.
Okay, Sophie, if you don't mind sharing.
That's fine.
Yeah, we
Would
can
we be
share,
able to see some slides of the
We're
artist?
trying to say.
Oh, right, okay. So maybe you would like to start us off, Emii, if that's okay, talking a little bit about your practice.
Yes, hello, thank you very much for coming. Thank you for the introduction. It's really nice to be here and to be in conversation with you, Charmaine. My practice, I'm normally based in Leeds. I normally practice with really large scale installation and sculpture mostly that is normally sort of built on site in gallery spaces, and it kind of uses scale and mass and material texture to sort of disrupt, I think, like ways of passage within the museum space. I trained as a registrar and worked in the museum sector for like 5 or 6 years, so worked very closely with objects and archives and stewarding those objects, conserving them, looking after them for like the future kind of generations of use. And then in 2021 sort of went full-time as an artist after kind of juggling for many years. But my practice is very much around the kind of critique of this Western, like I kind of think obsession with conservation and keeping objects and collecting them and excavating. I work quite a lot with archaeology, specifically looking at the politics of like ruins and like objects that disintegrate, and why we are so kind of interested in kind of capturing those in that moment that they sort of begin to disappear. I guess, yeah, without the slides is kind of, well, we'll see, they'll come up at another point. But yeah, I think for me, like another, like the other way that I kind of work is I go through really big periods of research, but then kind of like build these kind of world builds and these kind of narratives that kind of are then kind of imbued within the sculptures or the kind of installations that I make. And a part of that research process is a drawing practice, and that has, over the last couple of years, also sort of become a different strain within my work, that isn't just the kind of like mad sculpture. But yeah, as I said, like there's a lot of different elements within the works I'm making, materials that are very, you know, commonplace and found in the house, such as like cardboard or things that are waste materials, and kind of transforming them and making them look like artifacts of like high value, so like patinating them in certain patinas, and yeah, basically like making things look kind of archaeological and really kind of, oh, this is an exhibition that I just opened at Quench Gallery in Margate. But yeah, I'm really interested in scale and mass, and these are all sculptures that have kind of gone through the cycles of different installations. They kind of consistently reappropriate themselves. But yeah, I'll maybe just flip through them and I'll pass over to you, because I don't know. I don't really know.
Show Emii's work in the exhibition as well. So
yeah.
The first image that you saw on this slide, if we go back to the start, this is the work that's in the show next door. Okay, so this is Emii's work that's represented in the exhibition. So I guess this is shown like an example of your drawing practice in relation to some of the later images, which is more the example of the installations and the sculptural work that you just described.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, so this work is currently in the show in the next room, and I have a drawing practice. I actually come from a design background, and so I kind of use almost like a graphic language to kind of draw people in, because I understand, having worked in advertising, the power of the image. And so I draw myself, and I go through this kind of performative aspect when I'm making reference images in the studio, and I then kind of group these figures to create alternative narratives. My practice is research-based, and since 2021 I've been specifically looking at the botanical legacy of the Caribbean and tracing a lot of knowledge that ended up in the Caribbean via Africa. And so a lot of knowledge travelled with the enslaved to the Caribbean and the Americas. And I'm interested in the things that survive in terms of culture through displacement or through migration. And so I've done works with the British Museum, and I had a commission about 18 months ago to specifically look at the botanical collection of Hans Sloane, whose collection forms the British Museum. And from doing that commission, I'm now doing a fellowship to research more about what Africans and Indigenous Americans knew about medicine, which fed into the Western medical system. And so it's interesting because, you know, I read a lot of really problematic accounts in these journals, but what I seek to extract through my narratives is stories of empowerment, because when I read a lot of these accounts, I kind of think, what is it about the human spirit that can survive such difficulty? And so these women are very much empowered figures, and you know, it's that resilience and strength that I want to draw on, and it's that resilience and strength that I've seen in my parents' generation who came here. So with this was one of my first plant warriors. So in 2021, I did my very first gallery solo show. And when I was growing up, my mum treated me and my brother with herbs. And so I wanted to say something about that in my show, because I wanted to talk about the knowledge that the Windrush generation brought with them when they came to this country. And I remembered a lot of the herbal cures that my mum used to, you know, the potions and things that she used to make. And it was then, at that moment, when I was looking at that, I was thinking, where did that knowledge come from? And so I found a book that my aunt gave me about herbal healing traditions. It was written by a Rastafarian, and in it there was a point that stood out where he talked about the different spiritual qualities that plants have, and different plants have different levels of spiritual evolution, and so when you ingest the plant, you're taking on those properties. And so I then thought, what would it be like if I embodied that in human form? And so that's how these plant warrior women were born. And so this is the aloe plant, and in Jamaica people call it single Bible because they see the plant as a Bible for the body, because it's a cure-all, and it's the most highly evolved spiritual plant. And so I kind of put a lot of the attributes in the dress itself. So I put like a cosmological mandala there to indicate her high spiritual status. So with all of my plant warrior women, I reference the Victorian neck collar that you find in a lot of the kind of paintings that you see in museums and galleries. And there is this very formal pose, which I see as quite colonial as well, because you see it referenced in a lot of these paintings, but also you see it referenced in studio photography of the 1960s and 70s as well. And it is this very kind of constructed way of presenting yourself that a lot of people who have been colonized have adopted. And so I wanted to kind of play with that as well. But it's also a very regal pose as well. So these women are very strong, very self-contained, and I see a lot of that kind of dignity in the older generation. So, yeah.
Examples of the type of portraiture that you're talking about here. Yeah, please do, as you wish, look round and see the comparison with some of the artworks in this room. Thank you both of you for introducing your work there. I'm really excited to learn more about it and also explore some of the kind of synergies between your practices. I'd like to ask a question to start us off, if that's okay, to start off this conversation. Thinking about drawing as a method, as a medium, looking at the works that you're making and hearing what you've just said about your own practices, I almost feel that there's a use here of drawing as a record or interrogation, often of histories that perhaps are not otherwise materially evident or kind of present for us in those very material ways. And I wonder whether you would agree with that. Do you see a relationship between drawing, recording, perhaps retelling, excavating?
Sure, yeah. Yes, I think so, as the kind of short answer to the question. For me, I think drawing is always a way of like starting like a flow of sediments in a way, and I think it's always for me it's a place of starting to like loosen and to like kind of almost like, it's like, you know how when you're like writing, like I think there's like a kind of connection between like your hand and the pen that like forces you to take things slowly and to really think about what you're putting out, especially with handwriting. And I think like with drawing, I think for me it's like a very similar kind of technique. It's this kind of like relationship where you're almost trying to like leak out like these histories, these like oral passages, like these, I don't know, researches or histories or whatever it is that kind of are like enrolled within that you kind of start drawing them. I don't know, like I think for me, I don't know about you, Charmaine, I tend to like research, and then like I'll have like a couple of like manic nights in the studio where I'm just like bashing out drawings, and like that part of that is almost, it becomes like an archive in a sense, and like not all of them are like usable or good or whatever, but it's really like a sense of like recording or like getting out gestures, I think, for me. I think particularly because I started drawing, I mean I've always drawn, but I think drawing was always so attached to my sculptural practice before kind of taking on its own like time and me being like, oh yeah, these are actually drawings and like they're their own things in their own right. It was always kind of like a place of draftsmanship, I guess. So, you.
I think drawing for me is a way of investigating questions that I have, because I have intense periods of research, but what I often do is start off with compositions, and then the compositions then start to speak to me. So I have, when I start drawing, I'm still researching at the same time. So it's almost like this three-way relationship between me, the research, and the drawing. And then I get to a point in the research where I stop, the research falls away, and then the drawing has its own life and starts telling me what it needs. So, and what I tend to do is layer as well. I layer a lot of meaning onto the drawings, especially the life-size works. So it's almost like I'm building like my own archive with that drawing. And I'll kind of hint at the research, but at the same time, I'm also, because of the composition, it suggests an alternative narrative, so you can enter the work from lots of different points of view.
I think we can see some of the layering in this work, which is in the exhibition.
Yes, so with this one, because the title also hints at things as well. So this one, double consciousness, beware of one's intentions. So this is the castor plant, and so the oil is very healing, can be ingested. It was used as a purgative, but also very healing, can be ingested. It was used as a purgative, but also I remember having castor oil rubbed on my navel as well if I had tummy ache. But the seed contains a deadly poison called ricin. And, there have been stories in the news years ago where, a Russian was killed with something on the pinhead, and that's ricin, basically, it's that deadly. So she has the knowledge to cure and to kill. And so this kind of beware of one's intentions in the title. But also there's a double consciousness as well, where it kind of has this reference to being aware, having this double awareness as a black person as well. Because you have to be aware, you're aware of your blackness, but you also have to be aware of how you're perceived by others living in, a Western society. So there's lots of different kind of narratives layered onto this work.
Yeah, the layering in and the detail of that layering is something that's really coming through. I'm wondering, Emii, is that something that speaks to you as well, that layering process of meaning or of material with the drawing, with your practice generally?
Yes, I think so. I think for me the layering of if we go to the maybe not the slide, the next, this one. This is like the first time I've really shown like a body of work like that is mainly drawings, and I think this is maybe where this kind of idea of layering maybe comes in to it more, because I think for me like my main kind of material language is definitely like sculpting and like using like plasters and using different types of patinates and patinas and pigments in order to sort of build up physically those kind of material memories that kind of replicate like outside worlds and fictions. Whereas I think here, beginning the kind of process of playing with like charcoal and then like oil pastels and inks, and like I've always used inks in a way, but like I think here was sort of like this beginning of playing with how to sort of like layer up like through the kind of physical materiality, but then also by producing a body of work that like almost within itself had a fiction through the drawing. So like I was almost kind of pretending that I was this kind of like mad geologist that was like, I had to almost kind of embody this role to produce the work for the show, which is titled Lithics, and it's a lot of different kind of stone works and these kind of imagined landscapes. So I think for me like drawing is something that does kind of, it allows you to sort of just be really imaginative, I think. I'm like I think, I don't know, I said earlier, I was like, I'm not going to talk about Tolkien and Lord of the Rings, but I'm going to talk about it because I love it so much. And but his drawings are like really like amazing, and I feel like the way that he's able to sort of build up these worlds and like really like create these like really watertight environments through just this pure imagination and this pure fantasy that I think like takes away from like the kind of built architectures that we kind of inhabit in our lives, which are so like impregnated with the histories of like wretch and like colonialism and empire and like sadness and strife. Also a lot of beautiful things about the wretched rock of the UK, but like, I think in relation to my practice, but like, I think the way that I think he kind of like brings together all these different like layers and images that are so just pure fantasy is something that like I'm really interested in, also maybe like how to kind of replicate that within the practice by kind of continuously building up a body of material. I don't know if this answered your question, so I just went on Lord of the Rings.
It did, and I think what's coming through in a really, really great way here is this idea of like world building, place making, environment. When we were having a little chat yesterday, we ended up talking about the different places that you guys had worked, and it transpired you've both been in the same place in the south of France, and you sort of worked in different parts of the UK, up in the Pennines, up in the Lake District, and both space and place comes into the works in different ways, but it seemed like a really important context to talk about. I guess the question then would be, would you agree that this idea of environment and place is important, and how does your work relate to those ideas? Can you do that?
I think environment is important, and I think the environment can spark new ideas. I mean, doing the residency in France certainly did, because I knew when I did that residency I wanted the headspace to explore making sculpture, and that residency gave me the opportunity to do that. And I think just being out in nature, it got me to connect a lot more to my practice and to actually just make works that weren't for a gallery, but it's just making work just for the sake of making and enjoying that process as well. And it just took me in so many different directions. So when I was out in France, I found out that I was accepted to the Liverpool Biennial, and they invited me to write a proposal. And it's interesting because in France I did all these paper sculptures. I made all these neck pieces because a lot of people say, oh, the plant warrior women, the neck pieces look really sculptural. So I explored making those when I was in France. And so when I wrote my proposal for the Liverpool Biennial, I said, yeah, I'm going to do these 3 life-size drawings, and I'm going to do clay sculpture, and it's going to be a shrine object in the middle of the room, and blah, blah. And I didn't think they would sign it off, and when they did, I thought, I've got to teach myself now how to work in clay. And many, many years ago, in a different life, I used to make shoes, and so I approached making this clay figure in the same way that I used to make shoes. So I cut pattern and I slab built it and made a 3D form. And then I embellished it with copper and brass because when I made my shoes, they were heavily embellished as well. So that was the only way. And I find that with me, whenever I've had my back against the wall, I've had to kind of use whatever skill I have, just to save me. And those moments have really transformed my practice because I started making life-sized work because when I was doing my foundation at City Lit, I picked painting and sculpture and had a terrible time in both. And everyone was saying, oh, your drawings are really good. So I did drawing, and then I thought, to challenge myself, I'm going to do something life-sized, not knowing that would become my practice. So yeah, it's these transformative moments in the right environment that can then, yield something really new.
Environments, transformative moments, installations.
I mean, I think for me, like, environments are have such an important place, like, in my practice, and I think, like, a big part of my research, it does take me out to, like, a lot of, like, sites. Like, I really like being in, like, nature specifically, because I think it's a place that doesn't really care about you, I think, which I really like in that sense, because you're just, like, in this thing that is, like, much older than you, and I think that timelessness of environments, I don't know, like, it really makes my head tick, I think, in a way where, like, then I go back into the studio and I'm like, sick, like, Gardale Sky, like, there's the drawing downstairs of it, like,
Is this from your Innova commission that you're thinking
this was,
of?
yeah. And, like, yeah, that commission took me, like, to, like, John O'Groats, and then to Land's End, and then through Gardale Scar, and I was kind of doing this, like, mad journey, and kind of going to all these, like, yeah, really, like, yeah, ancient sites of ends and severs and beginnings, in a sense. But yeah, I think like, environment is it really plays into a lot of the work, both in the drawing, like, element, but also specifically maybe with the sculpture. So that this image that's on screen at the moment is from a piece called A Ceremony of Spectres that I built on site at the Contemporary Art Centre in Cincinnati last year for an exhibition that was the 20th anniversary of the building, which was built by Zaha Hadid, which was, like, mental. I was like, sure, you want to invite me over? Like, that's mad. But, like, it was amazing, because I think what was really great about that space was, like, kind of being in a building like that, but then having the opportunity to just, like, completely fabricate, but using my body, like, using, like, how this would feel for somebody to, like, walk underneath this arch, or, like, how to sculpt something that would be big enough to, like hold you in, but also, like, be spacious enough for you to kind of, like, maybe explore, like, different types of environments that, like, we might find within our own bodies, within, like, these kind of, like, falsified ruins, or, like, what those kind of histories then kind of pertain, I think, was really, like, exciting. And I think, yeah, I don't know, like, I think that freedom of being able to kind of just build with your body, rather than, like, using, like, the tools of empire, i.e. the ruler. It's called a ruler for a reason, like, and, like, measurements and things like that, like, working outside of chaos in those environments, like, I think brings me quite a lot. Yeah.
And also involves gesture, because we've already been talking about gesture.
Definitely.
You can see that coming through again.
Yeah.
Amazing. And that suspended arch, so cool.
Thank you.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
I want to be there and experience it more. That's great.
It was very fun to build.
I could carry on asking so many questions, but I'd like to offer the opportunity to the audience here. Does anyone in the audience have a question for either of our artists?
I'm going to begin with a quick one, which is...
There's a lady over there as well.
If I just ask you, I'm taking the mic, about your titles. You both are very interesting titles. How do they come about?
Do you want to go first?
A lot of my titles tend to have like a coded message, but especially with the plant warriors, because I think a lot of my work, I feel it's a kind of a form of a healing, and I think it's a healing for the viewer and for myself. There's this kind of meditative quality. So when I think about the title, well, I actually feel the titles, I have to feel them. And because I think all of my characters are kind of have this kind of purpose in the world to kind of convey these messages. So yes, so titles.
Type of characterisation almost,
Yeah, so I think the titles are important, and because I feel with the work I want people to kind of slow down and contemplate and just kind of take in. So the title has to kind of sit with that. Yeah.
I think for me, like with titles, I'm really interested in language. I think is like another part of the practice as well, and how to sort of build fictive words through certain phrases. I think I'm really interested in. So like, I also kind of like to think about like my shows in almost in a kind of succession of almost chapters. So it, like the way that they kind of build up. So I think my first show I ever did was called An Ancient Quiver. But like a lot of like, I remember finding that I was working at the Royal Armies at the time, and then it was like these words kept popping up, and I was like, oh sick, like maybe that would be a really nice like title. And then after that it was like House of Team and Cattle. That was from like a book on liturgies that I'd found there were like Sumerian liturgies written by women, and it was like a curse on like somebody's house. And it's like, I think for me like these kind of titles always like spark off like a thread of research. It's like all of these images that almost make up a story. Like the show I did at East Side Projects in 2022 was called The Courtship of Giants, and again that was just like thinking about like giants in relationship to like the artifacts that we like excavate or take from like other countries that are massive and very architectural, also being giants. But then I was like thinking about giants lore and being like, oh, like but giants are really crazy, like why is everyone trying to hunt giants, like what did they do? Like you think about like Jack and Beanstalk, and you think about like Gulliver's Travels, where he goes to like Lilliput and like he gets sort of hunted down, and it's like, why are we so afraid of these things that are bigger? So I was thinking about giants, and then I was thinking about courtships and like the relationships of language. What is a courtship? Like it's a courting of something, but it can also be something that's quite like tense and like, I don't know. So I think for me, like it's a way of starting with a title, then like allows my brain to sort of just be like pew, 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 pew. Like it can try to like link up all these like different strands that I think kind of add this like dimension of layers to the practice too, and like different maybe access points as well for me. But I think also just I love language, and I'm like, there's just so many amazing words in the world, like and variations of them. I think it's sometimes just also quite joyful, like to just be really like, yeah, what does the courtship of giants mean? Like I don't know, it's just kind of nice to say sometimes too. But I think that's for me titles.
And it's interesting at both of them, the capacity of language to hold both those very like difficult, quite painful histories in many ways, but also find space for the joyful and the creative and the fictional, and to hold both of those things in those layers, I think is really interesting. Did we have a question from the audience? Thank you.
Just keep holding.
I think, sorry.
More of a comment, but I was intrigued by your having started using drawing with a different purpose, and then this is for Charmaine.
Okay.
Right.
And then adapting or exploring techniques to make your clay pieces. Have you done much work on clay before?
I hadn't really. I've never done clay sculpture. So God knows why I proposed it, but it's meant to be, obviously. But yes, I've never. I'd kind of done kind of ceramics classes on and off and made a couple of bowls and things that I never liked. But I think maybe there's something inside that just wanted to connect to, the soil in some way. And I suppose now that I've made that work and I've started making like a series of them, it kind of makes sense to now explore themes that relate to my drawings, but in a different way. I can access it in a different way, and it's more unconscious, because when I make these sculptural works, I'm not actually thinking of a narrative at all. I'm just responding to the object, and then it just grows from that. So it's a different relationship to the drawings, more unconscious, and it feels in some ways more natural as well.
I love the process of working out how to do things.
Yeah, I've got a problem-solving brain, which keeps me awake at night. But yes, yeah.
Thank you very much.
That's all right.
My question is about I'm going to put it in brackets, self-portraits within your work. Is it about, do you see them as self-portrait?
No.
Okay, so yeah, essentially that's my question. Do you see them, if not, why not? Why don't you see them as self-portrait?
Yeah, I suppose. When I make the reference images for the works, I kind of go into a different zone. So it's a form of embodiment, and a lot of the characters that I'm embodying are kind of women like my mum's friends, because they're all really strong women, and they had to go through a lot, kind of in the 60s, 70s, 80s. And so I'm kind of trying to inhabit this space of stillness and dignity, but strength at the same time. And so I see my body just as a vessel. And I suppose because I have my own kind of healing practice, I'm aware of the fragility of the body, but also the strength of the body at the same time, and how we inhabit these vessels, really, and what that means. And I think because I'm accessing the figure from that perspective, a lot of people can connect to the work, even though the narratives don't necessarily connect to everybody. But I find that so many people connect to the drawings perhaps because of that sense of embodiment. I think then the work becomes more universal. Yeah.
Great question, thank you so much. It also feels like just a little bit, you experienced or used embodiment as well in your own practice too, to an extent.
I guess so, yeah. I think for me, I was going to also ask you, because I'm really interested in how you're talking about a healing practice, and I think it feels grounded, and I really it's amazing. And I feel I was just thinking about my relationship to embodiment in my practice, and actually how I think for me it's so chaotic, and it's almost this kind of expulsion of the dinosaur can maybe attest to this, because you worked with me at Courtship of Giants and it was really hectic, and it's I feel for me within making is using the body to a point of almost just stupid exhaustion, where you're just almost kind of carving out, and you're just using your body as a gestural tool, carving the material and then covering it with plaster, using your body, and then the gesture that then imprints through the plaster itself, and how your handprints are kind of within it, and I don't know, this kind of it's almost for me like it feels like almost like a healing thing as well, because it's like it feels kind of like this is stuff that like almost like we shouldn't really do this in like gallery spaces, and like kind of make this kind of chaos mess and like have the tunes blaring really loud and just slapping things on and just doing things like proper jank style, like. But yeah, I don't know, I think
It's cathartic a little
it's
bit.
very cathartic. Like it feels very like there's this kind of like maybe it's like rage, maybe it's like I don't know. I don't really know what it is, but this kind of this point of like hammering it on at it, and then like suddenly you get this kind of world that's built, and then you're like, how did that happen? Like through all these different kind of stages. But yeah, I was just interested because I think I feel we both seem to find like a sense of embodiment within our works, but just through different like I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah, we've accessed it from a different point of view. Yeah,
Sorry.
absolutely, yes. Yeah, we've accessed it from a different point of view. Yeah, it's really interesting because there's so many connections between both of our works
Definitely.
as well. So, yeah.
What other connections are you seeing? You know.
This accessing of the archive, because I think for both of us it's a material that we use it as a material to kind of then weave into our practices. Definitely, I see that. And then we're both looking at the colonial, but from a different point of view. Yours is very much, there's that physicality of entering that space that then, you know, the person's immersed in an environment. Whereas I think with my work, there's this kind of, it's a different kind of immersing, because with mine, I think because of the stillness, you're drawn in, so you're kind of immersed in that sense. Yeah. So, yeah.
Really interesting. Thank you so much. Was there another question in the audience?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask about sort of the research process of like both of your works, and when you sort of have like especially the hidden practice part of it, sort of a pass down thing from elder to elder. Like how have you found that, and how does that work? How's the research process?
My research always starts with a question. So, for example, when I started looking at the botanical legacies of the Caribbean, I then realised, because I was asking, well, how did my mum know all this stuff, and my grandmother and my great-grandmother? And then it occurred to me, obviously came over to the Caribbean with the enslaved, that knowledge. And it was that kind of spark that then got me to start researching. And around about that time, that was when the British Museum asked me to do the commission. And they then presented me with all this information about Hans Sloane. And I thought, okay, so I have got to read all of these men's accounts of, you know, plantation life and gathering plant material, and then I realised that the material was gathered by enslaved people and indigenous people. And so it's just a simple question that can then lead you in so many different directions. But yeah, it's always like, how come? Or it's just these innocent questions that maybe a child would ask as well. And then you just, I don't know if the same process is for you, because you can get led on so many different tangents as well.
In it, like it's too much sometimes. I think for me, I think it's like questioning, but I think for me it's always like conversations and wanting to know more about where those come from, the origins of the stories. Like in my family, we've got like a really big tradition of like oral narratives, and we sit together and we tell stories and read poems, and like that's really nice, and that's a really nice way of like inheriting like traditions. But then at the same time, I think with my research practice, especially when it was like archives and collections, and when I worked within museums, it's like seeing these objects like, you know, outside of the glass, but like not really living, and they're like in the boxes, and they're like gathering dust and like rotting away. And not all museums are ones that are rotting away, like you know. But there's this thing of just being like, at what point does this object become defunct because the story is so far removed from it that it no longer has its identity as an object, despite the fact that it just exists within this object because we're not using it, we're not holding it, it no longer like has the ability to like erode as a natural memory might as well. And I find that quite interesting. Like just in relationship to like how, you know, when you inherit stories or like these kind of traditions that like are so important to all of us, I think, and like, you know, that our pasts are so rich and our lives are everybody has such rich lives, but I think there's this thing of like, you know, we lose things over time and over periods of history. And I think what I find really interesting, like within like objects and like questioning where those kind of histories come in when you just look at something that like doesn't have that memory attached to it anymore, like it doesn't really correlate to the way that we remember things and use them. But yeah, I think for me, like it's always a question, it's always wanting to know more, as you say, like it's almost this kind of like a really kind of childlike curiosity of just being like, whoa, what's that? Like, who made that? That's wild. And then just being like, yeah, I don't know. I think just seeing sometimes how much stuff we gather in collections and how much stuff there is in archives, and just be like, well, humans honestly are mental. Like, we're all nuts. Hoarders. Crazy. Shout out. But beautiful things have been made over the years, but also just wild. So, yeah, I don't know if that answered the question. I think I went on a bit of a tangent. But
no, that was great. And it's interesting as well to sort of see the connections there and what you're saying with the ways in which you're critiquing some of that colonial history. Some of that process of research seems to be very much about like digging down into those narratives of omission or covering up or excluding, and trying to kind of excavate some of those histories as well, like using archival processes in those ways. Is that fair, do you think, about your practice?
I think so too.
I think so, and I think it's also about filling gaps, I think, with me, because there is this thing about oral history, because I kind of remember my stories that my mum has told me, or that, you know, other members of my family. So when I'm looking in the archive, I'm kind of making these connections, and it's interesting, you know, I've got a fellowship now to Sloan Lab Fellowship to research more in depth on Hans Sloane and his collections. And it's interesting that he's documented a lot of objects that no longer exist because they're so old they've decayed. So for me, it's kind of reimagining those objects as well, and what kind of memories those objects held and what stories they could tell. So I'm kind of filling in gaps because there's not enough that I know about my own family history. Because of the history of the Caribbean, you can only trace your ancestry back so far. So for me, it's with this narratives that I tell, it's kind of reimagining, and also it's almost like a channeling process as well. Yeah. So that's why I call a lot of what I do memory stories, because I'm actually kind of feeling into the research that I'm doing, and, you know, doing that response from that.
And that goes back to that ideas about embodiment, I think, that you previously talked about. Thank you. Yeah. Another question, I think.
I don't know if this is appropriate for what we're talking about. I think there's an emphasis this afternoon on established artists and emerging artists. And in terms of the development of your practices, I'm interested in how you emerged as artists.
Is that emerged spiritually, emerged professionally, all of these things?
All of it is interesting.
Out of the wreckage. For me, I I graduated from like art school in 2016. I initially went to do like a degree in English and sociology, and then I dropped out, and then sort of tried to reapply for art schools, didn't happen. I got rejected from them, and then like managed to get transferred across to fine art at Leeds. So then I suppose I graduated and I was nominated for a prize, which then won, which was wild. And then, honestly, for me, like when I graduated, it was like the community of artists and like my friends who I studied with, and the people in the years above us who were like, you know, they were all just like grafting in Leeds, like, you know, working jobs like 9 to 5s or like evening work, and then like using the money that they had on the side like to fund studios and like to kind of take over spaces in Leeds. So we were like, oh, okay, like this could be a possibility, like we could do the same thing. And then for me, like I then got a traineeship with the Royal Armouries and Leeds Museums and Galleries as a assistant or like a trainee registrar, and then that kind of like put me on the path of working within museum collections. I was really fortunate to do that traineeship. Like it really like changed a lot of like my ideas around museology, but also like it gave me like a I suppose like a kind of industry like training in museums as well. So I could support myself alongside trying to keep up, like, you know, having a studio and doing art stuff outside. But for me, I think like I was working in the museum sector for like 5 or 6 years, and then doing art stuff on the side. So I was just like burning the candle both ends. And it was only in 2021 when, or just after COVID happened, I got like a Paul Hamlin Foundation grant, which is a COVID grant, and that really that changed everything for me. Like the support of that grant was where I was able to sort of like take the leap into being like trying this full time. It's been like 3 years now, which is amazing. I feel like it could stop at any point, but like, you know, it's that's kind of how I emerged. And I think also just like support of like networks in Leeds, like the Tetley were a huge supporter of my practice, like, you know, just having access or like speaking to curators in Leeds, going to events, like we were always, I think there's an amazing network of people in Leeds who have been so open to like young graduates who really want to stay in the city and like inviting us to private views or like, you know, having conversations with us. And I think that kind of investment from a city and then like whatever kind of programs were going on around that time, like I think they really helped foster like a confidence or maybe like a trajectory of some way, or like finding different opportunities that we could apply for, or them backing us up. I think that's kind of how, for me, I've just given you my life story. I'll give it to you. I feel like I don't know what else to say really.
I came from a background in design. I think I'd always wanted to be an artist anyway, but when I was 8, a teacher said to my mum, Charmaine has a good eye for design, and I didn't realise that there was a distinction between art and design, so I just pursued design. So I started out as a footwear designer. I used to hand make shoes, very couture, high-end shoes, and then business folded, and then I went on to study film. Graduated from my film degree in 1994. That's how old I am. And then I worked briefly in film, and then kind of around 1996 there was no kind of film work. The British film industry went through a real slump, and so I was out of work. And then someone who used to be a visiting tutor on my course said that he was working with this organisation called Innova, and they were looking for people to do digital projects with artists online, help to facilitate that. And I thought, no, I'm not doing that because I'm going to be a filmmaker. That's techie, I'm not interested. And then, but then by the time I got home, I thought I'd been out of work for 9 months, so I'd give it a go. So I ended up working with all these artists, doing all these kind of shockwave animation and different commissions. Did a commission with Welcome as well. And then they co-curated a show at the Hayward Gallery called Rhapsodies in Black. I did the website for that, taught myself how to hand code. It was mad. And then that was, then the show launched, and then my mum passed away after that, and so I thought I'd better get a proper job. And a friend of mine was working in a publishing company that had a digital arm, so I ended up being a digital designer there, and I thought, yeah, I'll just do it for a couple of years till I sort myself out, and then ended up being a 22-year career. But 10 years into that career, I just felt that I needed to get back to making. And so I started doing a lot of drawing classes and started doing printmaking. So it's like a 12-year process of just exploring lots of different things. I did a foundation course at City Lit, which I finished in 2015. And from that, got onto MA Drawing at Wimbledon. So I took a year out, and so started the MA in 2016 and graduated in 2018. And I knew that I wanted to work freelance for another year in advertising before quitting my day job, which I did in 2020. So during that year, I entered competitions. So it was the Trinity Boyer-Wolfe Drawing Prize, I think, that really kind of put me on the map. I was shortlisted for that, and the work was exhibited in a museum. I can't remember which museum it was. And then I was asked to kind of do workshops and speak at drawing events and things like that. And I think it was that interest that really gave me the courage to quit my day job in 2020. And which I did, and then the pandemic hit. But I managed to land on my feet because I was invited to do a 2-person show at a gallery, and that was a success. And then I ended up getting representation with that gallery. So that's basically how it worked out. But it's 12 years of juggling freelancing in advertising with starting a studio practice. And it's evening, weekends, bank holidays, yeah.
In it, like, what is a bank holiday? Like,
It wasn't, I know, yeah.
It means nothing to me.
Yeah.
Thank you both of you for sharing those journeys with us. I mean, so much hard work, but so happy to see you here and see the results of that extreme hard labour. We're coming to the end of our time today, and I would like to sort of finish off with a question that's a bit more forward-looking. So we've talked a lot about your practices, sort of the idea of researching and excavating into archives, feeling your way into memory. You know, we've thought about the journeys that have brought you here, but, you know, if we could look sort of to the future, and the final question I have for you today is, what next? Where does this take you next? Do you know? It's okay not to know.
I never really know, but I think now that I'm an artist, I can combine everything that I've ever done, and I've done.
You know you're an artist. You're always an artist.
But you know, it's kind of my type. It's kind of weird, because I've done so many different things before. Because even as a film student, I've worked in theatre. You know, I've worked in the fashion industry. I've done all these different things. So I think I'm always looking for different ways of expressing myself, and if I can use skills that I've acquired over my lifetime, then I will. So I think my only thing is to kind of expand my practice where I can introduce more things that I've done.
I think for me, also hard to kind of know what's next, but I think maybe like trying to incorporate like different elements into the practice, like possibly more like vocal work, like trying to think about, because I guess in some ways there's sort of like performance sets that I build, so like thinking about what happens if things are performed, and also just kind of trying to stride into like, I guess practice and with trying to relinquish the kind of shackles of like the colonized spirit, which I think is within like a lot of our curriculums and the ways that we move our bodies, and trying to be like, you know what, look, it's fine to just have a wee sing song and like put that into a show, and it doesn't have to be amazing because like we were just all born singing at one point, whatever. Like, I don't know. I feel like, I think for me, I think voice is something that I'd really like to start to investigate a bit more. but we'll see how that goes. It might be really bad. So
I don't think it will be. Thank you so much. I mean, I cannot wait to see the progression of both of those practices. So we've come to the end of our time today. All that remains for me to say is thank you so much to Charmaine. Thank you so much to Emii for coming and speaking with us today. Can we give the artists a round of applause?